Now, this morning we are honoured to have our Managing Director of Sydney Water deliver the keynote message for this event. I would like to introduce the Managing Director for Sydney Water, Rox Giroux. Thank you.
Thanks, Elise, and good morning, everyone. Look, it's fantastic to be here. It's fantastic to see so many people in the room. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge also the traditional custodians of the land and water and pay my respect to their elders past and present. Well, look, I think the introduction from the Minister was quite clear. I'm not going to do again the PS4, P4S. Actually, I can say that's the first time I've heard about it. So that was pretty funny, actually. Look, it's an important time. We've got a capital program in New South Wales which is massive. So we're talking about an investment all industry together of about 112 billion for the next 4 or 5 years, which is massive when you think about it just in itself for a state like New South Wales with about 8 million people. If you think about that, and if you think about the conditions of the markets, we know that the supply chain is still disrupted and will continue to be disrupted in the near future. We know that we've got a skill shortage in Australia following the COVID situation, and also because we're ramping up activity in the country. We know that COVID is still playing tricks in the country and making our lives more difficult. And despite all this, we have to deliver for our customers. So when you see the big picture and you think, okay, what's the role of water and what's the role of Sydney Water in all this? Well, our capital program is about 1/10 of the overall industry capital program. It's smaller, but it's still big. So it's about, let's say, 10 billion in the next 4 to 5 years. So this is still a significant number, but this is also absolutely critical if you think about it for our customers. What we are building is actually not only pipes and pumps, but it's actually, we are building a completely different environment for the people living in the area. And that's why it's so critical that we found a way to make it work and to make it work in an efficient manner that is still affordable for our customers. So when I'm saying that we're not only talking about pumps and pipes. Obviously, we do talk about pumps and pipes, but not only. The Greater Sydney Water strategy that we've worked on in the last 18 months with government and a number of different partners is something that is going to change the way we do water in Sydney. That is going to include water into the city. So it's not the Greater Sydney Water strategy is not thinking about water in just a pipe for drinking water and a pipe for wastewater, but it's really thinking about how can we integrate the water cycle in the city, how stormwater can play a role to create a livable city, create amenities for the customers. How can we manage stormwater better so that it doesn't pollute the waterways, and we can offer swim sites in Western Sydney? How can we make the city a lot cooler in summer when it's very hot, especially in the west, and we can grow a tree canopy to reduce the temperature? So that's all the things that are in the Sydney Water strategy, and it implies a very different way of thinking about the infrastructure that we are building every day. So that's something that we've started to prepare. We know that we've got this long-term capital program coming, and we know that as a corporation, we can't do that on our own. So 2 years ago, we started P4S, Partnership for Success. which is an absolutely fantastic way of partnering with the private sector and creating a space where we can work together to deliver something which is a lot better, a lot more efficient for our customers. And this partnering for success is not only something that is changing the way we are delivering infrastructure, but it's actually also changing the way we shape the company for the future. This is giving a long-term perspective to our private sector partners on what is going to happen. The beauty in this is that it creates an ecosystem where our partners can start thinking about recruitment, education, involvement of staff in a different way, building the skills of their staff in a completely different way, and really thinking not in a short-term, just one-off project, but really as a series of projects and programs of work that will last for a number of years. This is absolutely critical, and this is something we understand is absolutely critical for the private sector, to have this visibility on the long term so that you can build your capability and your delivery capability, and we can really find a way where you understand what we, Sydney Water, are expecting to deliver. And when I'm saying we are expecting to deliver, this is not we, Sydney Water, this is actually our customers that are asking us to deliver things in a certain way. So this partnership for success is a really important way of doing business. That's something that we want to continue to grow. We've got a number of very large projects coming to market in the near future. You probably heard about the Upper South Creek project that was announced not very long ago. There will be a number of projects coming in the next few years, and all this is part of delivering the Greater Sydney Water strategy. So again, the reason why we're here today is to discuss on how we can work together to deliver this massive program of work for the future, for the customers of Sydney. How can we work together and include the different parts of the community, the different part of the society, into our capital program? And we're very proud of what P4S and Sydney Water in general have done in terms of integrating a number of First Nation employees, First Nation suppliers into the program. It's been an absolute change for Sydney Water, and that's exactly what we want to have. We are serving a community that is very diverse, and having diversity in our supply chain, in our delivery mechanism is also very, very critical. So that's something that we want to continue to do. Today is a good example. We've got Supply Nation as a partner to today's event, and that's absolutely fantastic that we can clearly demonstrate that this is what we want. We're not talking about delivering a large infrastructure program, but we're actually talking about delivering a large infrastructure program, including the diversity of our community, and doing it in a way that is constructive, doing it together with every part of the communities. So thank you for coming today. The agenda is packed. There is a lot of really interesting discussion that are going to happen. It's meant to be open discussion. So, the feedback that you can give to Sydney Water today is welcome. This is the feedback that we're expecting on how we can improve things, how we can work together better for our customers. Enjoy the day, and thank you again for coming today.
Thank you, Rock. Today's panel discussion is centred on the conference theme, Post-Pandemic Opportunities and Challenge in Infrastructure Delivery. We have the privilege of being one of the first to hear about the key findings and recommendations of this year's Market Capacity Report, which has just been published. It's an honour to introduce Steve Brogan, Chief Policy and Research of Infrastructure Australia, who will be leading our panel today with a presentation on the newly released Market Capacity Report. Welcome, Steve.
Let's just check whether the roving mic is working. That's been my dream, to be mic'd up in a presentation. I can be more free. I was actually thinking I would come down and collect the clicker, consistent with my registration experience where I was typing my own name badge. But thank you for bringing it up. Delighted to be here today. In fact, in some of our work, we did a paper at the beginning of the year which we call Delivering Outcomes, which is about improving construction sector productivity. We actually cite this forum as an example of best practice in the industry for collaboration between government and industry. So I'm honoured to be able to talk with you today about this report. Now, I should clarify one thing. I am going to give you some sound bites about what is in the 2022 Market Capacity Report. It's the second year that we've done it. However, we haven't yet published, but we will do that soon. Let me start by also acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I extend my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders present here today. What you're seeing on the slide is an artwork that we commissioned from Kamilaroi artist Dennis Golding, and it hangs in the foyer of Infrastructure Australia, and it's a representation of Australia's first infrastructure. So the rivers and the pathways representing the connectivity by which First Nations people were able to transport goods, knowledge and stories. So, many of you I would be aware are not familiar with Infrastructure Australia. Many of you I'm sure are. I thought I'd give you a little bit of a rundown of what the essence of what we do is. So, firstly, our mission statement there. We drive change for sustainable, resilient and productive infrastructure that benefits Australians now and into the future. We have three core areas that our teams focus on. So my colleague the Chief of Project Advisory and Evaluation looks after our business case evaluations where proponents are seeking more than $250 million of funding from the Australian government, as well as determining investment-ready proposals to be included on our infrastructure priority list. And as for me in policy and research, it's about what reforms we need to address the challenges and opportunity of today's nationally significant infrastructure. And from that, we produce a 15-year plan, which we last produced last year. But the new work, which we commenced about 2 years ago, in fact, almost to the week the funding was first released to commence this program, which is to monitor the market's capacity to deliver on this record infrastructure pipeline. And so we published the report for the first time around this time last year. And as I said, the next iteration is imminent. So last year, what did we produce? So a report it was requested by the Council of Australian Governments, and now that is National Cabinet. So reporting back into the first delegates of National Cabinet, we produced our first report. And with it, some supplementary reports deep diving into the analysis around the skills shortfalls, a national study of infrastructure risk, looking at systemic risks, climate risks, macro risks across the Australian landscape, as well as specific project risks by interviewing senior project managers and government and industry stakeholders, and also partnering with the Australian energy market operator to understand their now superseded integrated system plan to spotlight what's required for the energy transition. And we've updated all that work this year. So it is coming, we expect in December, and a number of dashboards to support the work. But let me talk you through the high-level findings from this year's report. And many of this would be issues, conditions that in your roles and in your jobs you're feeling every single day. So it's possible that you're not hearing anything new. But let's reiterate what's going on in the market. And we've heard from the Minister just how challenging some of these conditions are and what we're saying here simply backs that up. So major public works since 2021, 1 year later, have increased. And we've also got the supply side challenges that we'll discuss in depth as a panel. Price escalation has gone through the roof. So we've surveyed industry to get a read on the extent to which the cost rises of non-labour inputs are impacting businesses, and that'll be published in the report. But the Australian Bureau of Statistics every quarter produce information on this as it relates to housing construction. And we're seeing some materials, timber and steel, examples of those commodities where the price rises in the last 1 year are above 40%. Further, the Australian Bureau of Statistics tells us that productivity in the construction sector is stagnant and has been for 30 years. So a large part of what I'll be talking about today is the productivity opportunity. For this one, let's just do a quick exercise to not get too comfortable. Can all the men stand up in the room? Okay, thank you. Take a look around, sit down. And now the women, if the women could stand up. I think that's a pretty good cross-sectoral representation of women in construction. Thanks. So, under these conditions, we start to see the effects of capacity constraints and what it means for the market that we play in. And it's come to light this year and played out in the media, and we've got Australian Securities Investment Commission data that we'll publish in the report to back this up, that construction sector insolvencies are going through the roof compared to a historic trend. We're also in our interviews talking with contractors, tier 1s through to tier 3s, who are saying, 2 in 5 of them saying, we're at capacity now and into the next 12 months. In the same survey, those same contractors are saying that we have ambitions to grow and we think we'll be able to grow. But in a market that is struggling for labour, you've got a great healthy tension for those contractors where it's actually going to be a very difficult pathway for them to navigate their growth ambitions. So the labour shortages that we published last year continue. And we've also got a report that we've done with the Department of Climate Change, the Federal Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, on the replacement materials opportunity, specifically in road projects, suggesting that there's more that can be done to use recycled alternatives in construction. And finally, we spoke with industry about those factors that are most detrimental to market capacity and the conditions of the market. And they cited that the risk allocation in contracts is not fair. So to summarise what we're saying in the report, and as I said, it's not released, however, these recommendations are things that we've said either in our 2021 infrastructure plan or in our Delivering Outcomes report on the productivity opportunity released earlier this year. So I have no qualms sharing them with you today, but the essence of the report says that demand has grown, and that is leading to more insolvencies in the sector and projects not going to plan. And so we're calling for proactive demand management. And what that means, and what we've seen from the federal government in the recent budget, is reprofiling the pipeline, longer-term transparency on the portfolio of upcoming infrastructure works, intelligent sequencing of projects that have not yet commenced. And so this recommendation is very much targeted at those things that are in the planning phase. And taking that extra time affords us the opportunity to spend more time on the upfront due diligence and get that risk allocation right. Supply is constrained, and so we need to look at ways that we can expand markets' capacity to meet that supply. And this is all about getting supply and demand back to some sort of equilibrium. So if you look at the recycled alternatives opportunity, essentially by growing the circular economy and upscaling our attention and effort to minimise the barriers in that industry, you effectively need to dig less out of the ground. You need less raw materials, and the result of that overall is an expansion of market supply. So it's an effort worth leaning into, as well as tackling the diversity an inclusion issue in the sector, embracing diversity and inclusion, attracting women to the sector. And finally, I mentioned the productivity opportunity. So if productivity at its core is doing more with less, then we need to obsess about improving construction productivity. And those three words seem so simple to say, and they are, but it's harder to follow through and do. And so I'll next talk about our paper that we released earlier in the year, Delivering Outcomes, which was a spotlight on the reform roadmap and the pathways we can take to improve construction productivity. Productivity is something that you can do every day you turn up to work. You can think about, as a leader in your position, what is it that I can do with what I've got today that's better than what I was able to do yesterday? What decisions can I take? So it is something that is very close to all of us, and it's not something that someone else will solve for us. Our approach to produce this research for the Delivering Outcomes paper was to collaborate with industry. As I said before, this is the paper where we cite this particular event as a really good example of government and industry collaborating. And the paper talks through 6 pillars of reforms. So outcomes for people and places is a suggestion that actually people aren't interested in a really good project to be delivered. They're actually more interested in a really good place to live. And so the essence of this pillar is about being more visionary with our planning. Infrastructure as a system speaks to the divorcing of thinking of individual projects, but thinking more of a portfolio and a program of work that does a better job of delivering on those outcomes. In terms of collaboration, it is the way that government and industry work together for sure, and forums like this, as I've said a couple of times, are pointed out as good examples, but it's also about the way we govern the running and the oversight of projects as well. As it relates to the commercial opportunity, we have a lot of work to do to standardise contracts, and we have an opportunity to look at the fair return between the players that are bound by a contract. It speaks to that risk allocation issue that I was speaking of earlier. In terms of innovation, we cite modern methods of construction as a really as a thing that's going on around the world, and in fact, it's going on here in this country as well. I myself, in a cafe in the inner west about 2 weeks ago, the road opposite me was blocked off, and a huge crane was in there lifting a giant second story from the back of a truck and plonking it onto the top of a house. So, you know, as someone who's lived through 6 months of renovations, I think I'd much prefer come home one day from work and it's done. And then finally, people. So it's not just about attracting the right mix and the right diversity, the right inclusive culture in the sector, but it's about having a great culture for the people already working in the sector, looking after people's well-being, looking after people's resilience. And so the paper explores all of that. And really what it's inviting is a mindset shift in the way we think about becoming better, about improving construction productivity. Early in my career, a boss said, people who work for you, they won't tell you what they want. They'll tell you what they think will get them what they want. I think of my son, just to kind of play this example out. Every Sunday morning he used to come down and say, Dad, can we go fishing today? And I'd say, no. Now, he says, Dad, gee, it's not very windy today. Beautiful day. What do you want to do? And he thinks I'll tell him that we'll go fishing, but unfortunately not every weekend. So when I put this together, I think about, at the essence of this paper, what we're trying to say. And it's about really broadening the articulation of what we want. To say, from outcomes, we want better visionaries. In our systems, we simply want better places. And for collaboration, we want better governance. In commercial, we want better risk control. In innovation, it's not about the technologies, actually, it's about the techniques. And as it relates to people, yes, our jobs could be better, but actually we just want a better life. And our job is a part of that better life. So that's everything I had to say. Thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to joining everyone on the panel.
Thank you, Steve. Some really interesting insights there, which I'm sure we will be expanding further in the next session of this morning, which is our global panel of industry experts, and they are here to discuss the latest supply chain advances, challenges and opportunities in the post-COVID future. So once again, we have Steve Brogan staying with us. I'd also like to introduce the other members of the panel and invite them up on stage. We have Paul Plowman, who is the General Manager of Asset Lifecycle at Sydney Water. Jamie Hollenby, General Manager of Finance and Business Performance at Sydney Water. Dr. David Hancock, Senior Commercial Advisor in the UK Cabinet Office. Thank you for making the trip to Australia. And Monica Bennett, Director, Thought Leadership, Global Infrastructure Hub. Kate Miles, Sydney Water's Head of System and Asset Planning, will be our facilitator for the panel discussion on the conference theme, Post-Pandemic Opportunities and Challenges in Infrastructure Delivery. We will also give the audience an opportunity to ask their questions that may come up during the panel discussion. We will have a Slido poll, which will appear on our screen soon, which you can scan, or you can send your questions to slido.com with the hashtag 1378017. Over to you, Kate. Thank you.
Thanks, Elise. And thank you to our wonderful panellists for being here today, and all of you. It's great to see so many people passionate about the industry such as we. So the Market Capacity Report predicts a new wave of public infrastructure spending, and at a time when 2 out of 5 contractors are already at 90% capacity. With spending likely to peak in 2023, we're now at the end of 2022, there appears to be a real risk that our supply chain isn't sufficiently resourced to scale up to meet that demand. Steve and Monica, I'd like to get your thoughts on what the best options are for us to increase deliverability in the context of this challenging timeframe.
Okay. I'm happy to go first. I think it does come back to the proactive demand in terms of the short term, the shortest term measures to control that, getting that equilibrium and getting that deliverability equation right between supply and demand. And we're seeing it already through the federal government's announcements in the October budget, where reprofiling was a key theme of the infrastructure announcements. But beyond that's a territory where you kind of wait for bigger decisions to be made. And I would point out as well that throughout last year, we know that the New South Wales government took some bold decisions to reprofile their pipeline as well, which is really, in the spirit of the cause. But for what we need to do today and tomorrow and the next day, I do go back to the productivity argument, and for every single individual thinking as a leader in their position, no matter what their position is, what can I do today or tomorrow or the next day to be more productive?
Thanks, Steve. Monica, your thoughts?
Yes, so thanks, Kate, and thanks to Sydney Water for including the Global Infrastructure Hub in this really important conversation. So I think it's interesting that you mentioned that it's going to peak in 2023, but from what I understand is that the future forecast is a little bit uncertain in terms of the types of investments or the volume of investments that are coming through as well. And this sort of uncertainty is something that we've been looking at through our work for the G20. And it's probably important to point out that the perspectives that I'm sharing is from the work that we're doing for the G20, which by its nature looks at more of the upstream sort of enabling environment and for infrastructure more generally. And so it is quite high level. I'm actually really interested in seeing how this kind of translates to sort of a local context and in a more practical sense. So I guess in answer to that question, it's a rather complex problem, I guess, to be solved. And so I wanted to tackle that in sort of 3 parts. And so the first one is there's an opportunity to be able to increase the attractiveness of the project pipeline. So I guess that in the context of, in a market where there's limited sort of capacity constraints in terms of delivery, there may be a need to convince contractors and investors to actually look at your pipeline of projects as opposed to others. And so earlier this year, the G20 asked the Global Infrastructure Hub to develop a framework for how we might be able to best scale up private sector participation into infrastructure. And that looked at a number of pillars in about 8 sort of key impactful areas. But one of the key asks from the private sector in terms of what they need from government is to have much more transparent and clear long-term infrastructure plans and strategies, and for the investments contained within those plans and strategies to have sort of clear direction and contribution in terms of how that's going to actually have an impact on sustainable development goals and climate targets as well. And the reason why this is important and why this becomes attractive to the private sector is because it actually helps to give them confidence that they're not going to be investing in or participating in a project that becomes a stranded asset, but also because it helps them justify to their board and to their shareholders that their portfolio aligns with ESG, corporate ESG frameworks. So that's kind of the first point, long-term plans and strategies. The second point is, as Steve mentioned, doing more with less. And I guess we're looking at this from the perspective of integrating infrastructure technology across the infrastructure lifecycle. So technology has a great potential to be able to automate processes, or potentially to be able to actually avoid having to do the work altogether, and that kind of frees up capacity. But also in terms of what Steve said around productivity, there's a lot of data, being quoted by McKinsey, for example, that shows a direct link between the adoption of technology and an increase in productivity in the construction sector. But also technology has a great potential to attract young people into infrastructure. So, by the use of really exciting technologies such as robotics, automation. I think David has a great example about the use of drones as well in some of his construction projects. And so, I think that there's a really great potential to be able to do that. And I think Sydney Water, is actually a global leader when it comes to technology and innovation. So it's a great opportunity to be able to leverage that capability. So it's all well and good to say that we need to integrate infratech as business as usual, but I think we all know here that that's actually quite a complex undertaking. And so what we're really focused on is being able to have the right kind of enabling environment to attract investors and to attract participation into increasing that investment into infratech. And again, that goes back to having technology as a core focus of those infrastructure plans and strategies. And there's actually quite a lot of really great examples around the world for how that has been effective in attracting investment into infratech. So so my second point is around technology. The third is around increasing the participation of women in construction. So that 12% figure seems like a pretty dire figure, but having been in the sector for about 20 years, I can understand the sentiment. But I mean, in addition to leveraging women's capability in the current market, there's also the potential for women's participation in infrastructure to actually help deliver better quality outcomes when it comes to infrastructure. And this is actually something that the GI Hub is very much committed to and passionate about when it comes to advising the G20 on their multilateral infrastructure agenda. So I shall leave it there and hand back over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Monica. So we know that these post-pandemic challenges are both local and global, and increasing prices around or costs of labour and materials and even the cost of capital as well is hurting the infrastructure industry and impacting project delivery. So David, from where you sit, you've got a closer view of the European situation at the moment. Could you talk a little bit about the challenges that are impacting heavily on infrastructure delivery, both globally as well as in our region?
Thanks, Kate, and thanks for inviting me. Kate said to me, had I done any work before to look at the industry here before I came here? And I said, not really, it's exactly the same as ours. Inflation is one of the biggest things. Straight after the pandemic, we had products. We couldn't get hold of products, especially things from porcelain comes from Ukraine. You can get products now, you get anything. Get timber, you can get any product if you're willing to pay for it. And the price has gone up. And one of the other things that it showed us was how the construction is really an ecosystem. And actually DIY is affected as well, because if you now want to do an extension to your kitchen, it will cost you 30% more than it would have before all this kicked off. So construction, infrastructure, all those bits are quite tightly knitted together. The biggest one we've got is contracts which were written with an inflation of about 0.5%, and they said, we don't need to put an inflation clause in, David. We haven't had it. Now we're sitting there going, oh my God. I've got contractors who won't take fixed price. Why would you take fixed price in this volatile situation? No contractors will agree to do fixed price projects for me. They want variation clauses in there, and even some of the projects I've got going on now, we're negotiating some of the variation clauses. Because it doesn't help me if a contractor goes bust. It doesn't get my project finished. And even worse, we had a couple of hospitals that went Carillion, you might have heard of, where it was a big company that went bust. Then people wanted to do due diligence on the work that they'd done because they wouldn't accept the work that they'd done as work, and it turned out rightly so, for the work going forward. So I think we're all in the same issues. Again, labour force, you might have heard of a thing called Brexit we had in the UK, which has reduced the labour force I can get from Europe. We used to get quite a lot of labour force from Europe. So I can't get any more labour from Europe because of migration. And the inflation is really, really at the top of people's minds.
Thanks, David. So now I'd like to go to Paul and Jamie and talk a little bit about how we can shock-proof our supply chain. So when we think about the quantum of materials and tools and people that are involved in delivering infrastructure projects, we've seen, incidents like the Suez Canal blockage impact 18% of global trade, not to mention the current impacts of the war in the Ukraine, which has obviously created significant disruption globally. What are your views around what we can do to strengthen or shock-proof our current supply chain?
Okay, you described a couple of very acute instances, which gives us rise to think, well, what's the systemic thing going on there? And I guess rational economic theory says that you sell the goods that you're incredibly good at producing and efficient at producing, and you buy the goods that you're not particularly good at producing. And that theory's been around for 120 years, and over that 120 years, you can see the supply chains getting tighter and tighter and less suppliers for certain goods because they're the efficient ones. And maybe we've got to peak frontier at the moment. And then I look at the way and some of the productivity efforts that we're making now, and that house was a beautiful example, because when I started 25 years ago, you might think that of any contract, some 25-30% would be kit that you buy. That is a much bigger proportion now because of that supply chain. So we're more dependent on buying things, doing less in situ construction, but more modularised construction to get that productivity dividend. And so we're more dependent on that supply chain, yet that supply chain is getting more and more sort of condensed in how many suppliers you've got. So, we really need to turn maybe some thinking around being more and more efficient on that frontier to think about what is the value, and turn it to a risk conversation, say, what is the value of more diversification in the supply chain because it's inevitable. The events that we've seen are probably more indicative of our future than possibly 50, 60 years ago. So I think we do need to think about diversification in our supply chain. Would be just one of the aspects. But Jamie, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that we're doing that are really important. One is that long-term planning, and you heard the Greater Sydney Water Strategy 20-year plan. So it's not just the next 5 years, which is critical, but it's also longer than that. We're also in the process of building a long-term capital and operating plan, which will look out 20 to 30 years. And that long-term view gives us some opportunities. It gives us some opportunities to look through cycles. It gives some opportunities to partner. And so that having that longer-term view is really important. So I think that from an equipment and materials perspective particularly, that long-term plan with forward programming, visibility of what that looks like, gives people an opportunity to invest in the equipment and deal with the long lead time material items, potentially not the cost, but at least availability. On a people side, the other thing we're doing as an organisation is increasing the amount of customer engagement that we do. We are a people and customer and community-based organisation. What we deliver, our industry delivers, is for us and our community. And I think I love our industry, and I think it's a very attractive industry, and I think there's an opportunity for us to bring diversity into the workforce, bring more people into our industry to support what we need to do over the next 20 to 30 years.
Thanks, Paul and Jamie. And thanks for the segue into people, Jamie. Because I did want to get the thoughts from David and Steve. So Sydney Water and a lot of our suppliers are, obviously, I think we're all experiencing a very excessively heated labour market at the moment, and global labour movements still haven't recovered after the pandemic. What are the solutions to quickly fill the knowledge and skill gaps that we have?
Want me to
Go down.
So, yeah, I'll stop. You can do two things, can't you? You can either get more people, or you can do things differently. Let me start with doing things differently first. We're looking at using modern methods of construction and moving towards manufacturing. If you're going to want to look at an efficient industry, look at manufacturing. Manufacturing's far more efficient than construction. And why is that? And the reason is standardization. You know, you don't go in and buy your computer by going in there and saying, what outcomes would you like from your computer? What happens is you go there and say, I'd like you to do these things. That's the one I like. And my boss has got one of that, so I'll have the next one up, please. Right? That's the way you go to things. You go and you say, what works? Car industry. You know, again, everybody tells me construction should be more like the car industry. Well, I hate to say this, but that means more consolidation, not diversification, consolidation and long-term relationships. We've written a thing called the Construction Playbook, which is how we will have a compact with industry, and we wrote it in co-authorship with industry. And so what we're saying is we're looking for I want standard products. I don't want you to come and tell me how to build a school. I know what a school looks like. What outcomes do I want? Well, I want my children to be educated. I want the teachers to be good, right? So we go to the education department. We're on our 5th generation school. It's a Gen Zero school, which is hoping to be, will be fully carbon efficient, net zero. Not only that, let's go beyond that, climate change. I came here thinking Australia summer would be fantastic. Got in, it was raining. And then somebody said to me, you want to see the flooding just down the road here? And it completely took me by surprise. Australia, you know, all the pictures I'd seen of it were big deserts and dry. So we've got to change. And we've got to move towards manufacturing. And we've got to move towards standardization. We call it standardization, harmonization, and then digitization. And the thing about digitization, if you're in manufacturing, there is no separation between what you do and digitization. It all works seamlessly. If you look at what happens there, just in time, we can't do just over there's a pile of bricks, just over there's a pile of sheets and sand. Like just in time manufacturing is that. What happens is you have a pull, when you use something, it tells somebody behind you that you've used it, can you send me some more? I went out for a drink in the Rocks. You've got these things on the table now, Q codes, you tap on it, you order, they come out to you, it takes your money off and all the rest of it. Construction, we're yards behind that. Where's all your RFID coding that says, I click on this, oh, I know what that is, I know where it goes, I know what time it goes in. None of that, and yet you can do it in the pub. So we need to move. Technology's here. We're just using digital technology in an analog way. You know, we think we're digital because we've got an iPad and we write it all out and then we print it over here for somebody to take away. You know, buildings, we don't know. I got involved with Grenfell when it came down. They said to me, David, how many buildings have we got over 18 metres with ACM cladding on them? I didn't know. There was no database which says, if I came in here, if one of those panels went, we'd have to get a bespoke person in to do it. Your iPad, your phone, You go on there, you get a part number, and guess what? When it comes, it fits. Standardisation. So that's what we're moving. The other side is get more people in. Now, I have a different view about why there's not many people in the women in the construction industry, and that's because it's rubbish. It's a horrible job. You have to work from 6 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock at night. You have to be there. I've got a daughter. My daughter said, well, why would I want to go in the construction industry, David? So what we have to do is make it more attractive. We make it more attractive, we'll get more people. That will include more women. Bizarrely, we have 12% women in the construction industry in the UK. Only 2% on the front line. Only 2% actually on the front line. So you have to make it more attractive. You have to make it more flexible, because all of us are working differently now. You know, in some cases in the UK, 2 people have to have a job to pay the mortgage. So what about childcare? What about picking your child up at 3 o'clock? Well, no, we've got a concrete pour, David, you can't leave. You know, we're looking for manufacturing. A factory, when you work in a factory, you can swap shifts. Have you ever seen the pictures in the war? What was the ratio of women to men in a factory? More, 60-40. What about disabled people? We could make them work in a factory. If you start to use this stuff, we can get the disabled people back into the community, working. So manufacturing works for all those things. Standard products, small factories, localised, because in the UK we have a levelling up agenda. We don't want to move parts halfway around the world because of the carbon. So we start setting up factories to build schools, hospitals, prisons. I've got a prison, I'm on my 3rd prison. I don't want a contractor to come in and tell me anything, not even the colours of the bed sheets. They've all been done by psychoanalysts for the prisoners. That's how much I don't want. What I do want you to do is tell me, how are you going to get it there? How can you put it together? How can you assemble it? Why is your company better at assembling it at the north? Maybe that's where all your people are. And so early contractor involvement is different on different projects. And when you come on board, that's what I want you to tell me. Not to tell me, oh, David, you ought to change the windows. And even worse, in construction, normally you change the windows halfway through the job. And then they say, well, how do I get, because what investors want is certainty. That's what they really want. They want certainty. They want to know they're going to pay their shareholders. They want certainty of the price, certainty of the risk. If I buy it components, I put it together, what is that? How many cost consultants do I now need? How many architects do I now need? And when I use my digital stuff and my drones going up, who can now do surveys in a couple of hours that used to take 12 people 2 weeks to do a survey, you know, that's how radical we need to move. And for me, it's moving into manufacturing, and that will make the difference. You look at the productivity of manufacturing. Most of you probably remember when TVs, remember when your TVs were on, it cost you a fortune to have a colour TV about this big, and you all got close to it. Now look at the things, they're huge. So that's the way forward, and that's what we're looking at in government, and starting to put that in contracts. Standardisation of contracts. I use the NEC contract on my complex ones. Why? Because my project managers understand it. Why do I want, every time I get a new project, the only people who understand the contract is the lawyers? Because they're not delivering it. They're just arguing at the end of it. They come back in again to get more money than they did when they wrote it in the first place. So standardisation is what we're looking for. Sorry, I've gone on. Got me on one of my high horses.
No, I love your candour and enthusiasm, David.
If I may, actually, I'm not sure if my mic is on. I actually just wanted to share a story about actually being one of those 2% on site. I started my early career in wastewater treatment and working on site in treatment plants in Queensland. And I absolutely loved the job. So I didn't actually think it was rubbish. I thought it was great. It was exciting. And the work was fantastic and the team was amazing. But what did actually sway me to consider to move away from that job was because I couldn't quite imagine myself being pregnant and being on site at the same time. Which had nothing to do with the merits of the actual job and how much I would actually learn from it. And so I actually made that kind of conscious decision to actually transition away from that sort of job. And I guess at the point at which I then moved away from an on-site job, I couldn't see any merits of moving back into it. So anyway, I just thought it was kind of interesting that, you know, maybe it's not such an immediate and obvious reason, you know, the reason why women are not sort of in construction or on site, you know, at that particular point in time, but it's worth sort of bearing in mind that there could be, you know, a huge diversity of reasons for that.
Thanks, Monica. Steve, keen to get your thoughts on this one as well.
Sure, why not? Let me start by saying that the construction playbook that you co-wrote was an inspiration for the Delivering Outcomes paper that we produced. And in the same way, I'm inspired by your contributions, David, today. But let me talk about the other thing that I think is important in Australia is the training pathways for the people that are in the workforce. And the 2021 Market Capacity Report shed a spotlight on the adjacency opportunity within the sector. So not only pointing out the shortfalls as it relates to the particular job groupings that we'd studied, but what the adjacency opportunity is for training and pathways. And I know that recently, as a result of the federal summit, that there's a few actions that the Australian government is looking at around fee-free places in TAFEs and setting up Jobs and Skills Australia, which, if Infrastructure Australia is anything to go by, should be a success. And for the record, it was Anthony Albanese's brainchild when he was Infrastructure Minister in 2008 to set us up as an organisation. So I have no doubt that it's a good idea and it'll work. But the training pathways is key. So we make available the data that we've studied through a dashboard on our website at a national level, but we also give that data back to each of the states and territories through the collaboration deeds and data sharing arrangements that we've set up with them. So they give us a line of sight of the forward-looking infrastructure pipeline. We then apply the resource profiling that we think that pipeline's going to need, including labour, and then we give that data back to them, both supply and demand from a labour front, which enables people to study the pathways and really kind of pick apart what the training opportunities are.
Great, thank you. And before we close out on people, I am also keen to hear from Paul and Jamie if you've got any further thoughts as well. I mean, we're looking at a doubling of infrastructure investment over the next few years. How can we in the water industry attract the best capabilities from the market into our industry and secure that deliverability of infrastructure into the future?
I think Jamie touched on the pipeline and the fact that we're here to stay, and we have got a peak period coming up over the next 5 to 10 years. But really it's sustained for a very long period of time. So in terms of supply chain attractiveness, we're here for the long game, not the short game. And I think that I hope it has resonance with the market there. Having said that, I think as a water sector, we only represent about 10% of the spend that transport might have. So it's really incumbent from us to really think about our value proposition as infrastructure providers compared to other parts of the industry, and how our jobs might be not so mucky, and how our jobs might be more sustainable in the long run, how our jobs might be a closer nexus to great community outcomes as opposed to just big concrete. They're the things that we need to think about as an industry. And that's the attractive part of the equation, but when you're only 10% of the market, you've also got to have a retention strategy. You don't win a grand final with just offence, you've got to think about defence as well. And so some of those things need to work into people that already work in the industry, and what are the value propositions and how are we competitive with other infrastructure sort of segments.
Great, thank you. Now, we're going to take some questions from... Jamie, did you have more that you wanted to share? Sorry.
I'm happy to. Job security, long-term plan. There's an industry that's going to be around for a long time. pride in what we do. If you look at what we do for the environment, for the community, massive opportunity to attract particularly younger people who have a massive social conscience into our industry. We're also an industry that and David mentioned manufacturing. I think there's other aligned industry. There's complementary skill sets that we can bring into our industry. So there's a massive opportunity to attract people from those industries that do similar things, use similar skill sets, and bring together all of the different people who need to do our industry. So I think there's a number of things that we can do to attract people.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, we are going to take some questions from the audience shortly, but I do have one final kind of wrap up, just to see if anyone has any final thoughts in 30 seconds. The one critical area that you think is important for ensuring the sustainability of the sector, what do we need to do as an industry to survive and thrive together?
Also, collaboration, but true collaboration. I think people find it very hard to, it's hard to collaborate. During the pandemic, I was on the Construction Leadership Council. We actually saw the industry come together in the UK because of the pandemic. We had something that we all had to get through. And we wrote our site operate. We had the pandemic kicked off in March, just after one of the horse races, the Irish at Cheltenham. And by April, we had our site operating procedures out, and we had people back out working on site. We were the first industry. It's not often you can say this in construction. We were the first industry that came out of the pandemic with a site operating procedures, and that's because we really collaborated. But that was everybody hearts, that's on the ground. People saying, by the way, you know, small companies, cash is king. I have a real thing about cash flow. We are rubbish at paying people. In the government, 30 days. Right, again, I go to the pub, it's taken out by, they don't say to me when I buy a beer in the pub, oh, in 30 days I'll take it out of your account. You know, it was gone before I'd even got my beer to the table when I tapped that. They've got the code on there. Why on earth don't we have digital payment? Down through the supply chain. Not only that, I could track it down through and see who's being paid. Because as you go at the bottom end, cash is king. You've got to pay the mortgages. So for me, collaboration and understand what it's like to be at the bottom end of that supply chain.
Great point. Would anyone else like to impart final thoughts?
Yeah, I can go next. So for us, it's about data, and I think that this conference is actually a great testament to the power of data. And kudos to Infrastructure Australia for providing the market capacity report. It's actually brought everybody here together, under the leadership of Sydney Water, to discuss some of the key issues and actually identify solutions to help resolve some of those challenges. So I think that the transparency around data and the availability and people sharing data and knowledge, I think, is really key.
I agree with David. I was going to say working together. We've got some challenges, particularly in the short term, but if we work together over the longer term, we've got some great opportunities to deliver some good outcomes for our community.
Paul?
Never forget that we're here to provide services for customers, and that's a piece of alignment across the whole value chain there that we can really coalesce to collaborate, to work together. That somebody at the end of the line is actually getting a service for the infrastructure we built, and they're also paying for that as well, and that's what we're all here to do.
And we started with you, Steve. We'll finish with you.
Look, I'll just repeat something I said earlier. As we all obsess about productivity and the opportunity there, I think it really does come down to people, every single person in the industry, leading from their position and thinking, what can I do differently today or tomorrow or the next day where I am actually efficiently doing more with less?
Great. Now, Elise, I think we're handing over to you for a couple of audience questions.
Sorry for my back to you. Thank you, everyone, the panellists. That was an amazing, insightful, very quick 40 minutes, so thank you. Now, we had a really good response to Slido. Usually we don't have to plant any Dorothy Dixes even, so Because of time, I know you're all hungry and after coffee, I'll read out 3 random questions that came through on Slido, and then we might just have time for 1 or 2 from the audience. So these have been chosen at random. If your question hasn't been answered, maybe take advantage of one of the breakout sessions to get one of the other experts to give their insight. So first one, I'm biased, so I'll go to my colleagues for Paul and or Jamie. Given Sydney Water's increased investment over the next 5 years, what skills would you recruit to support that investment?
Wow. Where do we start?
All of the above. I think I'd start with mindsets rather than skills. So I mentioned before, and this comes out in our graduate recruitment processes and all of those things. It's a mindset of being customer focused and realising that everything that we're doing is for a customer. And to bring that mindset to having conversations about how can I do something more efficient today than I was doing tomorrow, and productivity, a commercial mindset around how we collaborate and how we work together. And so I would say that it's not a list of jobs you've done on the CV. It is more about how you can bring a mindset and a set of behaviours to work closely together.
Great answer, Paul.
Okay, this one is, I'll open it up to anyone. What does proactive demand management look like for the delivery of essential services when so many of the projects are both urgent and important?
Oh, well, look, since I raised the issue, why don't I start? So I think, so essential services is obviously tricky, but it then just comes back to prioritising what's the most important things to do and in what order. And that's what the heart of the proactive demand recommendation is, to intelligently leverage the data that we have and the knowledge that we have around the resource requirements for projects, to complement that with government priorities and policy priorities to pick the investments that are the most sensible to do first. So it doesn't deprioritise any sector over another. It simply says what are the governments of the day's priorities and how best can we deliver it, given that we've got the data right under our nose that tells us what resources we need. And as I said, an important mechanism to be able to do that is to provide that data back to the states and territories so that they have that knowledge.
We're in a really interesting industry because we have traditionally been a just-in-time industry. Why would you build a pipe to a development that's going to happen in 10 years' time? And that's the trick, and that's a dilemma for us, and it's something that as an organisation we need to address moving forward, because just in time, when you have COVID and weather that delay things, is not just in time's late, and so that's one of the challenges that we have and need to address. And I think it's a valid question around how do we prioritise and get things done just in time or a bit ahead of time rather than late.
Can I just add to that as well? It might not be evident to everybody in the room, but I think we actually do that on 2 levels. At a very strategic level, and some of the work that Kate's doing at the moment around putting the 20-year plan together, we actually do order those big projects based on the need that the community is going to have, and try and order those and take into account through forums like this and industry engagement on capacity, including the reports that Infrastructure Australia very much rely upon, those sort of forecasting to say, actually, do we have the capacity to do these big lumpy projects at this time? And if there's ways to shift them, we do. And then at a more closer level, in the 1, 2, 3 year period, there's a much, and why did we set up the P4S model? It's precisely to do that. It is for us to be transparent with our forward program and to say, this is what the community needs to be done, what are the practicalities of that, and do we need to order those? And we do that on an annual basis. And so, you know, these are things that are not easy to do necessarily, but they are things that we're committed to doing, and we're getting better every year at doing that.
Final one from Slido, and then I think we'll have time for 2 questions from the floor. This one is specifically for Steve again, or Dr. Hancock. You mentioned a need for better contracts. Is the NEC framework the answer? Why or why not?
So, I'll start that first.
A few more years' experience than us using an NEC.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
hand that one.
So the NEC is the right contract when the conditions are right. So you need to train people up. It's quite interesting. So we haven't mandated NEC. What we've said is it's our preferred contract because it is quite good for complex and there's a lot of standardisation. Plus, if we've got any special clauses in there, the government, so for instance, paying in 30 days or other things that I've asked for in government, the use of digitisation, I can get it in there at the front end. So it is, but it doesn't mean it's the only contract. And what you need is clever people to be able to say, what outcomes am I trying to get and what type of contract do I need to get those outcomes? So I'm building 4 prisons. It's an alliance contract between 4 of my first-tier suppliers. That is that's under an NEC banner, right? We used to use other contracts in the Ministry of Justice, but we use it because that's what they like. That's what they understand. That's what they can make work. And that's the thing about a contract. Contract doesn't deliver for you, but you need to understand it. So look at it. If I look, my environment agency, they use NEC contracting. I've got a building I'm building in Antarctica. I was down there 3 years ago. They're using NEC. For some of the complex collaboration contracts, NEC and NEC alliancing contracts are the one. But you need to ask yourself and be trained enough. Don't just go, oh, I'll have this, and it didn't, and my project went wrong, and I'll blame the contract. And then you go, well, why did you pick that contract? Well, you told me to, right? Training, and somebody said it, training in contract management is key. Don't expect the contract to deliver. People deliver through the contract. The NEC contract is a nice, stable, you don't have to change it. I worked for Transport for London. I spent a long time taking 100 Z clauses out of it, most of which were to do with the transfer of risk back to the contractor. But it is a good risk-sharing contract. It is good for complex projects, and it is good for collaboration. So if that's what your projects need, then the NEC is what you need.
I might jump in there as well. So anyone that's interested in contracts and sort of innovative ways in which infrastructure projects can be contracted, we have a tool online called Improving Delivery Models. It kind of jumps into this topic from various challenges that are being experienced across the market. So if you're looking to manage uncertainty, manage risk allocation, manage labor shortages, there's actually a really great range of case studies with effective models for contracts. And actually the NEC contract is also one of the examples there, as well as a Partnering for Success with Sydney Water.
I was just going to add, sorry, very quickly, as it relates to productivity and the contracts and standardised contracts, you said a very insightful thing earlier, David. I'm going to bring it to everyone's attention, and you can elaborate if you feel you need to. But how is it productive if the only people who understand the clauses of a contract are the lawyers? And so there is an argument just around productivity that relates to standardising for the sake of the people who are delivering the work actually understanding the nitty-gritty.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, we'll just do one question from the floor so you can all get some food. Anyone? Our roving mic will... The lady in green key.
I can't see.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Stephanie Chu from SHL. And my question comes from a people capital perspective. Just following on what you've just said about it's the people that deliver through contracts, people deliver. My question is, how does Sydney Water identify and map existing skills from within to requirements?
Could you say that again for me? I couldn't quite hear.
Sure. How does Sydney Water identify and match skill sets and mindsets and behaviour from within your existing workforce to requirements?
Well, I think we've got quite a standard set of talent development and workforce development processes and tools in there. So we have extensive position requirements and all of those sort of things, and we map our talent against those. We've also got extensive career development activities. People can go on project management courses, get qualified, all of those sort of things. One of the pieces of work that we're doing over the next 3 to 4 months, though, is quite a detailed workforce plan to match the increase in the capital program. And one of the things that obviously will be about skills and capability development, but it's also about volume. But it's also the piece of work that's probably most important is actually what I would say the peripheral kind of skills in the organisation, not the direct project management, direct engineering skills, because we can resource and plan for all of those. It's actually the consequential impact of running a program of this size in our operations, and what are the skills that we need outside of the direct delivery engine for the delivery engine to be successful. So we're doing some work on that at the moment.
Well, we could talk all day, but I encourage you all to ask your questions in the panels and even just amongst yourselves. So that is the end of this morning's session. Thank you, everyone, and to our wonderful panellists. Your insights were really wonderful. So just before we go, we do encourage you to post about your day using the official hashtag, which is hashtag SWExpo22, and then everyone can repost, share, tag, collaborate. 30-minute break now for refreshments to my left, and then we'll begin the session rooms at 11 a.m. So thank you very much, everyone.